Hi everyone, welcome to goldfries, where we do the test so you get the best. I'm your host, Brian Chong, and in today's video, we'll explore the matter about pairing slow RAM compared to a fast RAM and whether it actually affects your gaming performance. Interested? Well, more details right after this. Alright, so let's begin. In this test, we have the ASRock X570 Taichi with the Ryzen 7 3700X cooled with a Wraith Prism. Thermal paste is by Thermal Grizzly. And for the memory, I'm using a T-Force Excalibur, which it can achieve aggressive timing of 3733 at CL16. So in this test, I'll be using stock BIOS setting for the RAM, which is 2400 CL16 compared to the 3733 CL16. I know it's 3733 because that's a limitation. I do have a new stick of RAM that does 3800, but that'll be for some other time. And for this test, we'll be running at 1080p and we'll be using the AMD RX 5700. So it's not the XT, it's the 5700. See, no backplate, everything. So this is the RX 5700. It's not the strongest graphics card I have, but the reason to choose the 5700 is to find out how actually this thing affects gaming performance even for a card that's at this price point, lower than, just a bit lower than the popular RX 500 XT, and it should be around the RTX 2060's performance. I'll have some benchmark on that later on to see for this comparison. Okay, so back to this video. Before that, let's talk about three matters of why this video comes about. Now, some people are saying that running Ryzen processors at the low RAM speed is disastrous. The way they put it is as if that the Ryzen will be performing super duper badly with slow speed RAM. Now, this is not the case, and because the Ryzen system actually performs very fast even with the very base level of RAM speed like 2133, 2400. It's just that it performs even better when you have more aggressive RAM timings. So it depends on your perspective. Do you want to look at one as expected and the other as bad, or the other one as good and the other better? I prefer the latter, okay? So this, I mean, you've seen my benchmarks on my memory kit review. The test I use would be like, say, for production purpose, would be the DaVinci Resolve. At certain conditions, you see that RAM timing does improve the performance, but that is all for productivity side. It took me hours to find out what actually works for all these things, and now we are going to explore gaming part. And well, in this video, I'm not going into 8 gigabytes single stick setup because no, to me that is not for your gaming. You should always run dual channel at the minimum. Whether it's 8 gigs or 16, well, I personally recommend 16. Go with 8 if that's your only limitation, but dual channel it is. I had this experience of which I've accidentally dislodged my RAM stick because I thought I wanted to take it out, and then I decided not to, and then the RAM stick, guess what happened? I forgot to secure one. So I was playing Apex Legends and I somehow noticed that there's a performance difference. This is not something, it's not apparent, but based on my experience, I'm able to tell. But it's minor, but I managed to figure out that it was a RAM problem. So based on that, I will not recommend single stick 8 gigs for RAM setup, and I don't think anyone should. So move on to the second point. Some people say that tuning the memory can improve 50% of your frame rate. Sounds good, but this is do understand that frame rate is pretty much dependent on your graphics card and how high it goes. Yes, AMD Ryzen system can improve your performance, but in those tests, I mean, this blanket statement is actually, to me, somewhat misleading and misinforming. Yes, 50%, but at what frame rate? And you must see kind of like what title. Most of them, they are using CSGO at 720p or 480p running at low settings, and they say that's a 50% performance boost. Is something, it's like saying that it's basically like tuning the test to cite your claim. Kind of like saying a rally car's, kind of like judging a rally car's performance based on the rally car running on an airstrip, straight plain road, which is not the case. So basically, it is true, but it is limited to certain conditions, and more often than not, this is a condition where people don't play at. People play at 180 and above. You buy a card like this to play medium or higher settings at Full HD, 1440p, and whatever, depending on the game settings. You don't buy a card like this, and in those tests, they use high-end cards and they play at the settings like 720p, 480p, low settings. So basically, high-end specs, low settings, just to make a point. But that point, when you express it wrongly, it's misleading. So people might think, I need to spend a lot on my RAM kit so that I can get 50% performance boost. Now, this is not the case. Now, third, every time someone says there's a third point is that every now and then you see on Facebook group or forums where these people, when people have problem with the AMD system, the first thing they like to pinpoint, especially if it's regarding to low frame rate or stuttering and all that, they start to point to RAM. As if RAM is always the cause. As if slow speed RAM is always the cause, which is not the case, which I'm going to prove to you in this video. So it can be the cause. The whole system depends on many things, software, hardware, firmware, whatever, but this is not always the case. So now let's, speaking of slow speed RAM, I have been gaming on slow speed RAM even from the first generation Ryzen. I had my overclock. For example, I have a 1700 and it was running at 3333. That was a very high speed at that time because the first generation Ryzen wasn't good at supporting higher speed RAM. But even so, after a BIOS update and my hours of configuration was lost, I got tired of it, so I ran it at default memory speed, and it works, and I have no complaints. I still get good gaming performance. So yes, basically it's like what I harp back to the first point. Basically, the performance is good, but you can get it better with better RAM timing. So let's move on to the benchmark. So in this benchmark, I have already mentioned about the hardware to be in use, and the RAM 2400 CL16, which is the default on the BIOS, as in when you don't set anything. And then there's the aggressive timing, which is 3600 MHz RAM, but I've already tuned it to 3733 at CL16. So let's look at the benchmarks right now. We'll start with the Shadow of the Tomb Raider, of which you see these two show practically no difference, 104 and 105. Over to the next title, there's Metro Exodus. Again, this game is, I forgot to mention that I'm using the highest available presets for the test. So for Shadow of the Tomb Raider earlier, it was highest. On Metro Exodus, it is on extreme, both showing the same frame rates regardless of the RAM speed. Next up, we have Borderlands 3. Again, 1080p under badass setting. It is of the 66 and 67, which is pretty much no difference. Over the Division 2, it's somewhat custom because I choose the highest setting and disable the VSync and whatever else. And so it's, at the highest setting, it's still 82 versus 84. Again, pretty much within the margin of error of anything. So does not justify any performance. It does not show any performance improvement. Therefore, it looks like it does not justify anything of going to aggressive timing. Next up is World War Z, or some of you may call it World War Z, whichever, at 1080p Ultra. Now, this game is it's pretty much not demanding. So as you can see, it's 163 and 166. But in my test, there was once I made a mistake. I ran it at low, and I do see some 20 performance difference. But that will go back to what I mentioned earlier. That's just buying a high-end card to run at very low settings to get super duper high frame rates just to show the difference, which is unrealistic. Though it does show that the RAM affects the performance, but it's not a realistic use case. Up next, Dota 2 at 1080p. 115 versus 119. Again, pretty much on benchmark, you see that the numbers is like 4 frames apart. But truth be told, in actual gaming experience, you don't see any difference. Now, if you've observed so far, I have not used percentage in my summary so far because percentage can be misleading. 30 to 30 frames per second is 10% boost, but in actual fact they are pretty much the same, and to me is almost unplayable because at 30 to 33 frames per second average, you can expect the highs to be quite nice, but the lows will be really stuttering. On the other hand, 100 frames, let's say 200 frames per second to 220 is also 10%. At that point, you can't tell the difference. So 10%, again, it really very much depends on the settings. It might sound really good. For example, I can say 10 to 15 frames per second is 50% performance boost. Sounds great, but totally unplayable. You get the drift. So moving on, the next 3 titles are the ones that seem to have somewhat more performance difference. Starting off with Assassin's Creed Odyssey with the test setting at 1080p and ultra high. At 2400 MHz, the frame rate is 61, and at 3733 it's 66. There's about 8% difference, which is quite a fair bit. So I did a little bit of investigation, and it seems that at the 2400 MHz, the 1% low is at 45, while at 3733, the 1% low reaches about 50%, 50 FPS on average. So there's some slight boost on the minimums, and the average is 61 versus 66. Interesting. Next title, Far Cry 5. Now this title shows a huge difference when it comes to the average and the 1% low, with the average at 101 versus 114, which is about 13% boost in performance, and even for the minimum. Now this one is quite a shocker, that the minimum at 2400 MHz is 76, while on aggressive timing it goes up to 92, but the peak performance hovers around the 130s range, which is not too much of a difference. Up next is CSGO at 1080p at 2400 MHz, 349 frames per second average, and while the 373 aggressive timing is at 375. But both of them scored about the same when it comes to 1% low performance, which is 74 to 76. So overall, the take-home point is that running an AMD Ryzen based system with a low-speed RAM isn't an issue. The performance is still fast. You still get to enjoy the games. It's just that when you run on the more aggressive timing, you may get performance boost. It's not as what they say, 10%. Yes, that is 10%. It is possible. It is even possible to get 50% boost, but that is often on a less realistic or looser settings. Now, as you can see, my benchmarks are all on high, maximum available profile, and the performance difference is either none, negligible, or up to 13% depending on the game title. So what do I recommend? I recommend always dual channel kit, and go with whatever you can afford. If you can afford 26, 36, don't fret about it. To me, the sweet spot is always a 3200 CL16, 3200 CL16. But if you can go with a higher speed model, it doesn't have to be a 4000 MHz because of the, I won't go into details, but you can read out about those things about infinity fabric and the optimal frequency, which is like 3800 MHz for the RAM and 1900 for the infinity fabric, 1:1 ratio, and the kind of details. We're not going to go that into this video, but if you can get a kit that does that, or even like my best kit available right now is running at 3800 MHz with 1900 infinity fabric and at CL16, which I think is pretty good. And If you can reach that point, it's pretty much not something you can distinguish. So I wouldn't make a fuss out of this memory setting. So overall, yes, just enjoy your game. If it's already running at 300 frames per second, getting you a boost to 330 frames per second, it's not going to make any difference when your monitor is just showing 60 Hz refresh or 144 Hz refresh or even 240 Hz refresh. Even if you're running a 240 Hz refresh rate monitor, getting around 150 to 180 frames per second is, at least based on my experience, is pretty sufficient. There's no, you can try to hit 240, but based on my experience, even hitting 150 to 200 at a 240 Hz range monitor, it's perfectly alright. Even now I'm playing games like Apex Legends. I'm running a 144 Hz monitor. My frame rate is fixed at 144, and sometimes at certain scenes it drops to 130-ish, but it's all good. So yes, the take home point, to sum it all, TLDR, get whatever RAM you can afford. I recommend dual sticks, 16 gigabytes. That's it. Try not to go with 8 because a lot of titles are now able to use more RAM. When the games have more RAM, it means less drive access. So it's all good. Dual channel, 16 gigs. I recommend minimum of just go with a 3200 megahertz kit. They are very affordable right now. But if you really cannot afford, you can just go for a 2400. Just go with it anyway and enjoy your gaming session. So alright, that's it for this video. I hope it's informative and I hope you like these details that I put time and effort to find out. And with that, if you like all these things, do remember to subscribe to my channel as more benchmarks, experiments, and whatever else are coming your way. Alright, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching, guys. Bye bye.